European chemical industry, which is by no means some far-seeing, pioneering, environmentalist enterprise, but they began seeing the possibility that these kind of policies could work, and the American chemical industry has just been repeatedly stuck in the status quo over and over again. There's a very big difference even between those two industries. Many of which, many of those European companies are here in America.
It's interesting. Do you think, as we talk about health care costs, that there's more concern in Europe because the states are paying the health care costs?
Yeah.
Single payer. They're paying for those costs. Here, the state isn't, so less concerned.
Well, when the debates began in Europe, you've identified the exact huge motivating force in Europe. The European states pay for health care of their citizens. So when people, advocates and scientists and such, started arguing these cases with their governments, they made an economic argument. They said, look, you invest now in getting these things out of circulation, and in 10, 20, 30 years down the line, there are going to be billions of dollars in savings. And that's, in fact, what the European Commission now estimates. That by these array of different environmental initiatives, they're going to save up to 40, 50 billion euros over the next 30 years. So it's an enormous financial investment in the health of their, citizens. And whereas in America, if God forbid something happens to any of us, we're basically on our own. And so, we're on our own financially, which is very difficult, and politically speaking, it creates a less receptive political atmosphere because there's not the economic, incentive.
Are there companies that are ahead of the curve here?
Yeah, there are companies that are ahead of the curve here. I mean, there's a big changes in the market now, and I'm not going to use one name or another because I don't want them to offer me some sort of gig afterward. But yes, of course, there are companies in America. Obviously, we have a changing atmosphere here in America in terms of consumers becoming more aware of these issues. But I would say one key element of that is, yes, the market moves forward. Huge market, organic, this and that is growing dramatically. Natural products, less toxic ingredients, more green, et cetera, et cetera. But there is a very key difference between the market moving those forces and laws. And if you don't have a law, what you have is a market that if people have the money and the knowledge, they can actually go seek out the products, and I'm sure people can figure out how to do that. But if you have a law, it makes it far more equitable because everybody gets the same protections, whether you have the resources or the knowledge to pursue the alternative. So I think there's a big difference.
I said I'd ask you about baby bottles.
Oh, boy. Well, it's I haven't used one in a while.
In them?
I don't believe they have phthalates. I don't believe they have phthalates any longer, but I believe they do have. Some of them have BPA, which is bisphenol A, which is a big issue right now as to how safe bisphenol A. A lot of fears that it is a potent endocrine disruptor, possible carcinogen, and why
are they in bottles? And can you ever find out how you can get them without that?
Well, you can actually go to a store, and if it says no bisphenol A, then you could probably trust it. But the point is that there is no requirement that be disclosed to you. And that's what we do not have here in America. We don't have a requirement that companies tell you what's inside their goods. So I think there actually has to be kind of a change in that regard. I mean, the reason we don't know a lot of what's in the goods is not some sort of accident. It's not because it's some incredibly complicated formula to figure out. It's because steadily over time there have been efforts to keep that information from the public. And I think a lot of what's interesting now is that there are levels of disclosure required on European products that are not required in American products. We live in a global economy. So that information is going to start making its way back here to the United States. And I think it's going to start creating some interesting tensions when people start seeing information disclosed there that's not disclosed here.
What about deodorant?
Deodorant, I don't know about deodorant. I think I don't know the answer to deodorant because it's got here's the only thing I can tell you is that synthetic aromas are something I would not want to immerse myself into too deeply because the particular nature of those concoctions have been called into question.
So now, the power of the chemical industry here, the power of the European Union uniting, what that means, the history of that, of the European Union, and what you can expect to see, perhaps Africa too. Now Gaddafi, head saying that all of African countries should come together and form that kind of bloc like Europe.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating, of course, when we talk about European Union, I think is a fascinating political experiment. It's been because what you have is 27 different countries, and from all the way in Spain, of course, to Finland, to Sweden, to Cyprus, and they've decided to voluntarily integrate their economic, enormous portion of their economic systems, and to develop a joint political structures. And they've got essentially a parliament, an executive arm, and they have a judicial arm that enforces the kind of accords between the different nations. So this, as a political, they call it an unidentified political object. I mean, it's one of the ways that they describe it to themselves in Europe. And this entity, aside from having a lot of nice wine and cathedrals in Europe, what's interesting is that in 2005, this entity, the European Union, became essentially the world's largest economy. So supplanted the United States as the world's largest economy. So this notion of coordinated activities between countries in a world in which trade, this is one of the effects, the long-term effects of globalization. You were there, 10 years ago, you saw the debates over globalization. And who thought this would have happened, that this assemblage of countries would actually begin to have stronger environmental protections and radiate those throughout the global economy? I don't think people anticipated that 10 years ago. So now, what's interesting is that other parts of the world are beginning to assemble themselves. So look at you mentioned the African Union, which is actually beginning to see the European Union as a model for allying itself and beginning to assert its authority in the global economy. Similar things happening with Mercosur in our own backyard down in Latin America, where the Mercosur countries, I think it's now 5 or 6 Latin American countries, have banded together in an economic alliance that has certain common policies and which is detouring the United States. Not detouring, but their primary trading partner is no longer America. It's actually is the European Union. So this notion of how America exerts its influence in the world through trade and through standards, which the world used to follow, is no longer the case. It's a much more complicated and fluid.
Finally, Mark Schapiro, lawmakers pushing for a new government agency that would be responsible for food safety in the wake of the massive salmonella outbreak as a result of the Peanut Corporation of America. A bill sponsored by Connecticut Congressmember Rose DeLauro would divide the Food and Drug Administration in two, separating the agency's drug oversight and food safety duties. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack has gone further, suggesting all the government agencies are responsible for food safety, including those that are part of the Agriculture Department, should combine into one. Do you see this as a positive development?
Wow. Well, first of all, I think paying more attention to food safety is a pretty important thing. The USDA has just not been there on this. And actually, there's a lot of corollaries between the way we treat food and the additives we put in food and the chemicals we put in food to the kind of chemicals that I write about in terms of products and such like that, in terms of lack of regulation, pullback of restraints, grandfathering onto the market whole types of food treatments and such like that never got the oversight that was needed. Like, for example, the use of hormones in beef. This is an enormous dispute right now, but much of the rural does not allow hormones to be used in human beef.
We have 10 seconds.
All right. And so I think this is a very interesting time ahead. Enormous possibilities as Obama looks at some of these issues and responds.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us, Mark Schapiro, author of Exposed, the Toxic Chemistry of Everyday Products and What's at Stake for American Power. Clive Stafford Smith will not be with us today. We hope in the coming days, talking about Binyam Mohammed, just released in Britain from Guantanamo. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.